They grew up in privilege, yet carried the darkest legacy imaginable. What happened to the children of Nazi Germany's most powerful men after 1945? If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. Inside ornate walls, young lives were molded by fear, power, and ideology. Children of high-ranking Nazi officials grew up in households that balanced extreme privilege with rigid control. Lavish estates, abundant resources, and constant attention from nannies or tutors contrasted sharply with the ever-present shadow of their parents' authority and the looming expectations of loyalty to the regime. For viewers, the tension is immediate. How does innocence survive in a home where ideology and power dictate every action? From an early age, children were subtly and sometimes overtly indoctrinated. Schooling was supplemented with lessons emphasizing obedience, racial ideology, and the glory of the Third Reich. Family routines reinforced these messages. Morning assemblies, participation in party events, and exposure to propaganda films or literature. Even leisure activities often carried moral or ideological undertones. The audience is drawn into suspense as they imagine young minds absorbing lessons that would shape their identity, questioning the balance between nurture, coercion, and personal awareness. Daily life was governed by strict rules and observation. Parents, servants, and educators ensured conformity, leaving little room for deviation or independent thought. Praise and reward were tied to demonstrating loyalty or performing tasks that aligned with party expectations, while disobedience or questioning could provoke stern reprimands. Viewers engage emotionally as they witness the subtle mechanisms of control, appreciating both the privilege and the psychological pressure placed upon these children. Yet, despite the rigid structure, cracks appeared in the indoctrination. Some children glimpsed the human cost of the regime through their parents' secretive actions, whispered conversations, or exposure to wartime reports. Siblings might discuss fears quietly in hidden corners, or young minds might question contradictions between moral instincts and the lessons imposed upon them. This tension between inherited ideology and emerging conscience creates suspense and engages the audience in reflection on human development under extreme circumstances. The social environment extended beyond the household. Children attended functions with peers from similarly influential families, reinforcing hierarchical structures and social expectations. Friendships were often filtered through political loyalty, and play frequently mirrored the adult world of order, control, and competition. The audience becomes immersed in this delicate balance between childhood innocence and the heavy imprint of political power, generating both empathy and fascination. Ultimately, life behind the walls of Nazi elite households was a complex interplay of wealth, authority, indoctrination, and subtle psychological shaping. For viewers, curiosity is sustained through glimpses into a world both opulent and morally constrained. Suspense, reflection, and emotional engagement are maintained as the audience imagines how children navigated privilege, fear, and ideological pressure, setting the stage for the profound consequences that would emerge as the war came to an end and the world they knew disintegrated. Even playgrounds were overshadowed by the machinations of history. For children of high-ranking Nazi officials, the war was never distant. It infiltrated every aspect of daily life. Air raid sirens interrupted lessons and play, rationing dictated meals, and the constant presence of uniforms and symbols of authority reminded them that the world outside their homes was defined by conflict. For the audience, suspense arises as they imagine innocence confronting the pervasive influence of war, and ideology. Education extended beyond schools. Within the household, lessons often combined academic learning with political indoctrination. Children memorized patriotic songs, recited ideological principles, and participated in ceremonies meant to reinforce loyalty to the regime. Even seemingly mundane tasks carried symbolic weight, setting the table with precision. Assisting in family events or observing proper behavior was framed as a reflection of discipline and national pride. Viewers are drawn into tension and reflection, understanding how ordinary routines were shaped by extraordinary circumstances. Social expectations further complicated childhood. Playmates came from families similarly entrenched in power, and friendships were often influenced by politics and hierarchy. Birthday parties, outings, and holidays carried subtle messages about conformity, loyalty, and the importance of appearances. Failure to adhere to these expectations could result in social reprimand or subtle ostracism, fostering an environment where even leisure was politicized. Emotional engagement is sustained as the audience contemplates the psychological impact on children navigating these pressures. Family secrecy added another layer of tension. Discussions about the realities of war, atrocities committed, or personal fears were often forbidden or cloaked in euphemism. Children observed their parents' demeanor, noting whispered conversations or sudden departures, gradually piecing together the gravity of the world they inhabited. The audience experiences suspense and curiosity as these subtle cues hint at truths the young ones were both aware of and shielded from, emphasizing the complexity of growing up in a morally conflicted environment. Despite the rigidity, moments of ordinary childhood persisted: games, sibling interactions, and fleeting laughter, but they were always tempered by the overarching presence of war and ideology. The contrast between innocence and exposure creates both tension and empathy, allowing viewers to reflect on the psychological consequences of growing up under authoritarian, militarized households. Ultimately, early encounters with war shaped not only the practical experiences of these children, but also their understanding of morality, authority, and human behavior. The audience is immersed in a world where privilege, danger, and ideology coexisted, sustaining suspense and emotional engagement. Reflection, curiosity, and empathy are cultivated as viewers witness how children learn to navigate fear, expectation, and moral ambiguity, setting the stage for the challenges and revelations that would follow in the post-war world. One day, they were children of power; the next, refugees in a shattered world. As Nazi Germany crumbled under the relentless advance of Allied and Soviet forces, the children of high-ranking officials found their carefully ordered lives upended. Estates once teeming with servants, luxuries, and ideological reinforcement became dangerous zones, riddled with collapsing infrastructure, fleeing civilians, and the constant threat of retribution. For viewers, suspense is immediate. What choices could these children make when their world, once defined by authority, became a landscape of uncertainty and fear? Evacuations were chaotic and hasty. Families split, attempting to flee westward to avoid advancing armies. Convoys of vehicles, trains, or even foot marches carried children through towns already scarred by bombing and occupation. Fear and confusion dominated every step. The audience is drawn into the peril, imagining narrow escapes from streets filled with violence, abandoned homes, and the eerie silence of a society in collapse. Internment and arrests added layers of trauma. Some children witnessed the capture of relatives, including fathers, uncles, or household staff, and were thrust into refugee camps, temporary shelters, or the care of distant relatives. The abrupt loss of familiar routines, combined with exposure to hostility from local populations, created psychological stress far beyond what their privileged upbringing had prepared them for. Emotional engagement is heightened as the audience contemplates the vulnerability of youth confronted by the consequences of familial complicity. Displacement also severed social networks. Friends from similar backgrounds were scattered, communities dissolved, and childhood familiarity evaporated. In many cases, children were forced to adapt quickly to unfamiliar languages, customs, or authorities, while still carrying the stigma of their family name. The audience experiences suspense and empathy as these young individuals navigated survival under constant scrutiny and societal judgment. Even moments of perceived safety were fraught with tension. Families often moved from location to location, hiding identities or avoiding exposure, creating a sense of impermanence and insecurity. Meals, schooling, and basic comforts became unpredictable, replaced by anxiety, vigilance, and the weight of inherited legacy. Curiosity is sustained as viewers imagine how these children adapted, learned to read threats, and relied on instinct and guidance to navigate each day. Ultimately, flight, imprisonment, and loss shaped not only immediate survival but also long-term identity. For the audience, suspense, emotional connection, and moral reflection are sustained as they witness children confronting the collapse of power, the unpredictability of war, and the consequences of inherited guilt. The narrative invites viewers to consider resilience, ethical inheritance, and the profound psychological impact of historical upheaval on those born into the shadows of infamous authority. Haunted by their names, they walked through the ruins of society under a shadow of blame. Children of high-ranking Nazi officials emerged from the chaos of war into a world that judged them not for their actions, but for the deeds of their parents. Even as adolescents and young adults, they carried the weight of association, navigating communities wary of their family name and authorities cautious of potential influence or allegiance. For viewers, suspense and empathy are immediate. How do these children survive both materially and psychologically when society cast them as inheritors of infamy? Social ostracism was common. Peers avoided interaction, teachers treated them with suspicion, and neighborhoods whispered about their lineage. In some cases, entire communities shunned them, fearful of harboring the offspring of those once feared in uniform. Even distant relatives might refuse contact, worried that association could carry consequences. The audience is drawn into tension, imagining the daily subtle threats, the whispered rumors, and the constant need to prove innocence through behavior alone. Authorities imposed practical and psychological challenges. Children were sometimes separated from surviving parents, placed into foster care, or required to adopt new identities to avoid reprisal or societal resentment. Schooling, work opportunities, and even basic social interactions were filtered through suspicion. Their lives became exercises in caution, restraint, and concealment, heightening the narrative suspense as viewers contemplate the psychological toll of living in perpetual shadow. Despite adversity, many sought ways to survive and distance themselves from their family legacy. Some adopted new names, moved to distant regions, or entered professions that minimized social visibility. Others deliberately emphasized personal morality, public service, or academic achievement to assert independence from the moral culpability of their lineage. For the audience, this journey evokes empathy and fascination. How does one rebuild identity when burdened by inherited stigma? Psychologically, the consequences were profound. Guilt by association created internalized shame, anxiety, and in some cases, resentment. Adolescents struggled to reconcile the privileges they may have enjoyed before the collapse with the social isolation and judgment they now faced. Suspense and moral reflection are maintained as viewers witness the tension between inherited status, personal conscience, and the pursuit of self-determination. Ultimately, the children's struggle with stigma and survival underscores the enduring effects of moral and social legacy. Suspense, empathy, and engagement are sustained through vivid depictions of ostracism, hidden identities, and the constant negotiation of social judgment. For the audience, curiosity is cultivated not only about historical outcomes, but also about the psychological, moral, and ethical dimensions of navigating life under the shadow of infamy. This section prepares viewers for the challenges and resilience explored in the subsequent chapters, ensuring continuity of suspense, reflection, and emotional investment. Amid ruins and whispers of infamy, some forged paths of their own. The children of high-ranking Nazi officials emerged into a post-war world that demanded they navigate both practical survival and the psychological weight of inherited legacy. Education became a critical tool. Many pursued studies with renewed determination, seeking not only knowledge but social legitimacy, striving to demonstrate that they were individuals distinct from their parents' crimes. For the audience, curiosity is immediate. How do children born into stigma reclaim agency in a world that watches every move? Careers were another avenue for rebuilding identity. Some entered professional fields, medicine, law, academia, where merit could define reputation rather than lineage. Others gravitated toward creative or technical pursuits, finding purpose in work that required skill, dedication, and ethical contribution. Suspense and engagement are maintained as viewers imagine the tension between personal ambition and lingering societal judgment, and the quiet resilience required to succeed under scrutiny. Social relationships were complex. Friendships and romantic connections carried the risk of prejudice, judgment, or betrayal. Some children adopted new names or relocated to distant cities to escape notoriety. Others leaned on carefully curated social networks, forming bonds with those willing to judge them by character rather than heritage. Audience empathy is heightened as they visualize the delicate balancing act between trust, secrecy, and social integration. Psychological adaptation played a key role. Many children experienced internal conflict, navigating guilt, shame, and resentment while attempting to live ordinary lives. Journals, letters, and memoirs from survivors reveal moments of quiet courage, moral reflection, and determination to separate personal identity from parental legacy. Suspense and emotional investment are sustained as viewers witness the internal struggle alongside the external challenges of rebuilding. Resilience, often manifested in extraordinary ways. Some devoted themselves to humanitarian or public service work, consciously countering the shadow of family history with actions that contributed positively to society. Others documented historical memory, assisting historians or archivists in recounting the atrocities of the past, transforming inherited stigma into a platform for education and reflection. Audience curiosity is engaged as they contemplate how the choices of these children shaped both personal outcomes and collective memory. Ultimately, the process of rebuilding lives was neither uniform nor easy. Each decision, from education to relocation, from career to personal relationships, carried the weight of history, morality, and survival. Suspense, empathy, and reflection are maintained as the audience witnesses the interplay of choice, consequence, and resilience. This section emphasizes human agency, the power of adaptation, and the enduring impact of moral inheritance, preparing viewers for the final reckoning and historical reflection. In the next section, they face not only the past of others, but the echoes of their own names. As children of high-ranking Nazi officials matured, the shadow of their family history became impossible to ignore. Historians, journalists, and filmmakers sought interviews, testimonies, and memoirs, aiming to document first-hand accounts of life within the inner circles of Nazi power. For viewers, curiosity and suspense are immediate. How do those linked to infamous figures navigate truth, responsibility, and memory? Interactions with historians were often tense. Children were confronted with questions about parents' actions, moral responsibility, and the consequences of inherited privilege. Some embraced the opportunity to clarify events or provide context, while others resisted or carefully framed their words to maintain privacy. Suspense is maintained as audiences anticipate revelations, the hidden details of upbringing, and the ethical dilemmas these individuals faced. Memoirs and personal writings became a conduit for reflection. Diaries, letters, and interviews revealed internal struggles, guilt, and attempts to reconcile personal identity with parental legacy. Some expressed shame or anger at the deeds of parents. Others sought to honor innocence or commemorate victims by sharing insight into the mechanisms of complicity. The audience is drawn into emotional engagement, understanding how the weight of history can shape self-perception, relationships, and life choices. Public narratives added further complexity. Media coverage, documentaries, and scholarly works often cast children of Nazi officials under the lens of inherited culpability. Some faced skepticism, mistrust, or prejudice in communities, schools, and workplaces. Suspense and moral reflection are heightened as viewers witness the delicate balance between revealing history and protecting personal identity, as well as the social pressures of confronting or correcting public perception. Psychologically, these encounters demanded resilience. Reconciling private experience with collective memory required navigating guilt, responsibility, and social judgment. Some children actively engaged in historical projects, helping archivists or researchers, while others distanced themselves entirely from their family's notoriety. Viewers remain engaged through empathy and suspense, imagining the tension between duty to truth, personal safety, and emotional well-being. Ethically, the process of confronting history was both a personal and societal exercise. By participating in memory preservation, acknowledging the consequences of parental actions, and reflecting on inherited moral dilemmas, these children contributed to broader understanding of complicity, justice, and human behavior under extreme regimes. Audience curiosity and intellectual engagement are sustained as they consider the interplay between personal narrative and collective historical responsibility. Ultimately, confronting history allowed these children to navigate the complex legacy of infamy, offering reflection, closure, and moral insight. Suspense, empathy, and engagement are maintained throughout, as viewers witness the intersection of memory, identity, and ethical reckoning. By exploring how children of Nazi officials confronted the past, audiences are invited to reflect on the enduring influence of history, the weight of inherited legacy, and the capacity for human resilience and moral consideration.